أهلا بكم مشاهدينا إلى هذا اللقاء الخاص مع مستشار الأمن القومي السابق لآخر رئيس للاتحاد السوفييتي ميخائيل غورباتشوف ورئيس السابق لمنظمة الصليب الأخضر الدولي البروفيسور ألكسندر ليكوتال. أهلا وسهلا بك بروفيسور ليكوتال على سكاي نيوز عربية. لقد مضى 18 شهرا على بداية الحرب في أوكرانيا. هل جرت الولايات المتحدة أوروبا إلى حرب مع روسيا وخيبت أملها؟
You know, any war is a very complicated issue, always. And it has many layers, and the sources of it go into these layers of history and relationship. But in this case, I don't think that there are any reasons to blame the United States for dragging Russia into the war. I think that we should not forget that after Gorbachev's perestroika, and thanks to that perestroika, the world lived for more than 30 years in peace, more or less, but without major conflagrations. And actually, the nuclear threat has been shelved for all that period. And nobody was, afraid of the use of nuclear weapons or anything like that. And suddenly, because of the reckless politics of the Russian leadership today, it is again on the agenda. And we are seriously discussing whether the nukes could be used in this world.
ألم يتجاهل الغرب والولايات المتحدة مخاوف روسيا وكان هناك تراكم لهذه المخاوف مما أدى إلى هذه الحرب؟
Okay, you imply the idea that NATO was expanding and that was the reason. Look at the map today. There is Sweden, there is Finland, members of NATO. NATO has never been that in that cohesion as today because of the war. So either it was a terrible mistake or it was a folly, terrible folly on the part of the Russian leadership because they have miscalculated grossly in that situation.
تحدثت عن التهديد النووي. اليوم هو يعتبر أكبر تهديد يواجهه العالم. هل تتوقع أن يكون هناك مواجهة نووية بين روسيا والغرب؟
Nobody knows what is in the head of the current leadership, Mr. Putin and his associates in Kremlin. But I think that they have realized now that the West is totally consolidated today in that war, that 18 months the support of Ukraine has allowed Ukraine not only withstand the aggression, but to offset to a certain extent this aggression already. And I do not see any possibility that this situation will be stopped, even if there are change of governments in the United States or anything. Because the attitude of the people in a democratic world determines the vector of politics of the leadership. And according to the polls, the majority of the Americans, not to say about the Europeans, are all supportive for the continuation of helping Ukraine to withstand this aggression.
إلى أي مدى يمكن أن يواصل الغرب والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية دعم أوكرانيا لا سيما وسط أوضاع اقتصادية ومعدلات تضخم مرتفعة؟
Well, currently this war looks like the war of attrition on both sides. And that means that this kind of war stops always when both sides calculate that the price of the war is too excessive for one of the sides or for the both sides simultaneously. And that opens the way to negotiations and conclusions, certain a certain peace or ceasefire or whatever. I think that given the pace of the development, we will still live in the active phase of this war another at least half a year, if not more. On the other hand, it could just become a sleeping conflict, which will not stop, but it will be,
an open conflict.
Yes. So there are no good prophecies in that area, but I would expect that something will start changing by the spring of the next year.
ما الذي قد يتغير في الربيع القادم؟ ما هي الظروف التي يمكن أن تغير مسار الحرب؟
There are many factors that will affect the evolution, how it goes on. Political. There are elections in the United States, there are elections in Europe, there are phony elections, but in Russia as well. Then, of course, and by the way, in Ukraine, I don't know whether they keep it during the war. It's still the question.
بالحديث عن روسيا وأوروبا، الاتحاد الأوروبي اليوم يواجه تحديات حقيقية، وهناك بعض الأصوات التي تغرد في سرب مختلف. هل تتوقع اليوم أن يبقى الاتحاد الأوروبي موحداً وأن يستمر بالتوسع؟
I think any living and growing organism experiences certain problems. That's inevitable. Health problems, any kind of problems. Today, of course, in Europe, we have the old Europe, we have the medium Europe, and we have the newly adopted European countries like Estonia, Latvia, etc., Baltic countries. And all of them have their sort of goals, preferences, and obviously this creates frictions. But taking into account that Europe has existed already for so many, as an entity, integrated entity for several decades already, actually they have succeeded to overcome these problems. I feel that today this war is also consolidating Europe as it has consolidated NATO as well. And that creates different, perceptions and inside Europe. And of course, for instance, there is a special relationship between Poland and Ukraine. It's traditional, historical. But we should not forget that Poland is 60 million people. Ukraine is 40 million people. If Ukraine joins Europe, 40 million people plus 60 million, it's 100 million. It's a huge chunk of the European Union at the process of the decision-making inside the country. So all these issues will continue to be following EU. But I think that it has proved its utility. And I would say that the best thing that demonstrates it, that it has started to be replicated in different parts of the world. In the United States, in Africa, African Union.
بالحديث عن التكتلات السياسية والجيوسياسية والاقتصادية، حتى نرى اليوم تكتلات جديدة. بريكس الموجودة أصلا تتوسع، نتحدث عن بريكس بلس اليوم. كيف ترى مكانة هذه التكتلات وصعودها في إطار النظام العالمي الجديد؟
When you break your favorite vase, it just falls down and breaks. The first thing you raise it and think, is it possible to
put it together?
Put it together. It will not be the same anyway. Today, the old world order has been broken. But unfortunately, so far, the world is trying to reassemble the parts of the world order into some new combination. it will not work this way. We have outlived the old world order, and any attempts will lead again to the recreation of the balance of power on the new basis. But we need to create a new world order, which will be based not on the balance of power, but on the balance of interests, balance of cooperation. Only this, but in order to achieve that, we have to depart from the old concept of the state-based world order, because we have new players today.
كيف تتخيل هذا النظام العالمي الجديد يعني بالاستناد إلى ما تفضلت به؟
Structures usually follow the sort of the order which has been already in operation. And this will be the case. Today already, big cities, they play enormous role in international relations. It is not yet formally recognized, but informally, they are already the agents of change. The digital companies, these huge companies which affect the life of the billions of people, like Facebook, for instance, there are more than 5 billion people of subscribers to that. You cannot ignore that. They affect the mentality of the people who are with them, and through that people are obviously influence the governments.
ما هي الرسالة التي توجهها إلى البلدان الصاعدة، القوى الصاعدة في الشرق الأوسط؟
Please think about qualitative basis for the new world. And in my judgment, you cannot avoid cities, big companies, big communities like European Union. And I would say also the various ethnic groups which exist in the world and play already a big role. This is a separate discussion, of course, but the world should start, and it has started changes already. There are, the ambassadors which were appointed to the digital companies instead of the states, etc., etc.
تستضيف دولة الإمارات مؤتمر كوب 28. ما هي رسالتك لقادة العالم؟
I think that the biggest problem with COP for already 27, and that will be the 28th iteration, that it continues to be only the platform of discussions. It should once make an effort to arrive to some binding decisions for the world.
شكرا جزيلا على وجودك معنا اليوم. شكرا لك بروفيسور.